episode is brought to you by A3, a CMMC cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification, otherwise known as an OSC, to build CMMC packages and share with a marketplace of consultant RPOs and assessor C3PAOs. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of 123 CMMC. My name is Dana, and I will be your host. And our guest today is Scott Singer. Hello, Scott. How are you?
I am awesome, Dana. How are you?
I am doing very, very well. We have a very exciting topic today that everybody is going to be hanging on our every word. So we're going to talk about flowdowns. Okay, so our first question is going to be, what is a flowdown and why should I care?
Flowdown. Yes, this is very exciting stuff. So basically, a flowdown is what shows up on a purchase order. And so if you are a manufacturer and you get a purchase order from a customer, and you'll likely get terms and conditions, and another term for it would be terms and conditions on the purchase order. But the DoD, Department of Defense, and the government calls it a flowdown. And what it is that it comes out of the award process from the government, and they'll have specific requirements that are going to show up on their award. And they can either be a federal acquisition regulation, a FAR, or when we're dealing with, DoD, and which is what we deal with, my company deals with a lot, it's a defense federal acquisition requirement supplement. And so it's basically just a subset of the FARs that that the DoD cares about. So the flowdown is something that shows up on the purchase order. And if, for example, you're working on an ITAR project, let's say for the military, and you're building a motor, and you say, oh, wait a minute, I need a supplier to build this carburetor. It's a bad example, but popped in my head. So I need somebody to build a carburetor for me, okay? And I give them a drawing that has DoD technical data on that drawing, like dimensional data, things like that. And I pass it to the people that are going to build the part. Well, as part of that purchase order, I have to also then flow down the same DoD requirements. For example, in this case, cybersecurity is what we work with, right? I have to flow down those Defars for cybersecurity to my supplier. So that's flow down.
Okay. Woo-woo. Okay, so what's a reps and cert letter from a prime?
Yeah, so every year, often annually, a prime is going to send out a letter to their suppliers, which the supplier has to represent themselves and attest that they're meeting these requirements. And again, we're kind of focusing here on the DFARS related to cybersecurity. And so you'll get a letter from, let's say it's coming from Northrop Grumman. Okay, and because I'm picking on Northrop here a little bit because recently they've gone a little bit beyond what the DoD has required, which I think is great. They've required kind of some extra pieces to this, and I'll talk about that in a second. But that reps and cert letter will come down and it'll say, does your company hold a medium level of assurance token? Okay, so as part of DFARS 252, 204, 7012. I know I promised I wasn't going to use a lot of acronyms. Sorry.
That's okay.
It sort of happens in this environment. But if you're going to do that, part of that requirement is you have to report to the DoD within 72 hours of a breach, okay? And the digital certificate, by the way, takes longer than 72 hours to get. So you really have to have that digital certificate before you get the breach in order to be able to report on time. Well, they're asking that question to a supplier. Do you have the digital certificate? Yes or no. Is your company compliant to FAR 52, 204, 21? Basic safeguarding of covered contractor information systems, okay? So if they're asking that question too, and remember when I said FAR, that's a federal acquisition regulation. So that's for the whole government. It's not DoD specific. FAR 52 has 15 requirements, cybersecurity requirements you have to meet. So they're asking, have you met that? In some cases, they're requiring that now. So that's why if I'm a small business owner, manufacturer, this is why I should care about this, is because when they're sending this letter out, or they're sending a purchase order with the flowdown on it. Remember we talked about flowdowns. If it has that 52-204-21 on the flowdown, then in some cases they're saying, I'm not going to issue you a purchase order unless you have that done. And it just goes on and on. They ask, have you completed the basic 31? Have you completed 100 of the controls? NIST SP 800 171 has 110 controls. Okay. Have you completed 100? Now, I haven't come across many companies that have completed 100 of these controls, quite honestly, yet. So that's probably the answer is going to be no there. And what's really kind of interesting is they're already asking, have you obtained your CMMC certification, right? Well, there hasn't even been one assessment done yet with a company, so the answer is going to be no there too. Anyway, you get this letter with all these questions on it, you have to answer.
Okay. All right. So then what do you do if there are many flowdowns on A Prime's purchase order?
Yeah, so this is also hard for a small business, right? Because they don't have a regulatory department, they don't have a compliance department, they may not even have an IT department. They probably use a managed service provider, an MSP, to do their IT for them, and those MSPs aren't, experts in this field either. And you'll get this purchase order with, hundreds and hundreds of these requirements on it. And, most small businesses, are going to just say, yep, I need this order, so I'm going to take it. And they don't they don't spend the time to necessarily understand every requirement, okay? Which is understandable. This whole process really needs to get more simple for these small businesses. Nobody wants to not comply with the requirements, but it's pretty tough when you get, in fact, a lot of the primes even point you to their website where there's hundreds more. There'll be a little web address as part of the terms and conditions or flowdowns, and you got to go there. So what do you do? Honestly, I would probably reach out to SBA or SBDCs and states and start there and get some help. Also, the MEPs, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, which is actually a NIST organization. Every state has an MEP, and those are really good resources to go to. So if you get one of these and you just feel like you really need to know more, start with some of those places.
Well, I think, and as far as streamlining, that would help in so many different ways, because this is so overwhelming when you get all these different, first of all, you got to look up what these things even mean, number one. And when it's that overwhelming, it's very hard to even start or approach, and that's why people, I think, kind of just throw it to the wind and say, you know what, we'll deal with it if we kind of get caught, with this. But if we are all just doing some basic stuff, the whole country would be in a much more better place with this stuff. So that's the part that's a shame, is that if you said, okay, we're going to throw all this stuff out the window, we're just going to have these 10 things everybody has to do, 10 basic things, and then kind of build off of there. But
build on it. Yeah, that's a good way to go about it, definitely.
Yeah, but that's not what's happening. So anyway, okay, so if a prime asks if you are DFARS 252, 204, 7012 compliant, and you don't have every control in place, how do you answer?
Well, the good news is that the 7012, and actually buried underneath 7012, is the requirement, that reporting requirement I talked about before as part of 7012, but also the requirement to meet NIST 800 171. And that's the 110 cybersecurity controls. That's embedded in there too. But the standard allows you to have a get well plan. And that get well plan is the POAM, or the plan of actions and milestones. So
The new Department of Defense's cybersecurity program, CMMC, can be very confusing and overwhelming. A3 is a cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification. A3 builds CMMC packages and has access to a marketplace of consultants, RPOs, and assessor C3PAOs. A3 creates a roadmap for each cybersecurity requirement and helps break things down step by step. Please visit cyberdataintelligence.com/A3.
You have to have this, in the end, to be 7012 compliant. You have to have a system security plan. And that tells you how you're protecting CUI, ITAR 600 series, DoD data, okay? Then you have to have this plan of actions and milestones, and that's your gap analysis, your get well plan, and it tells, what I'm deficient in and what I'm going to do to meet the requirement. And then, again, you have to have that medium level of assurance, okay? And that kind of meets 7012. Now, what is not there is that 7020 now, which came into effect November 2020, that goes one step further and requires you to report a score. So,
Okay.
You get all that, Dana?
Yeah. It's very heavy, very quick. If a prime asks you for your SPIRS score, what should you tell them?
Awesome. The SPIRS, SPIRS is Supplier Performance Risk System, and it used to be used only for really somebody that had a prime contract with the DoD, and it was a way to report against their contract how they were doing. It was also a place where they would post things about their small business plans, about how they're buying from small businesses and disadvantaged businesses, minorities, things like that. So that was what SPIRS was for. But again, with that new clause that came out, 252-204-7020, okay, and you also hear often 7019 with it too, but that's a notice, okay? The meat of everything is really in 7020, okay? So that clause says you have to report a score in SPIRS, okay? And of course, it's not that easy. There's this crazy kind of connected systems between SAM.gov, if you've heard of that, the system for award management. There is an electronic business person point of contact. Well, that has to go through the other systems all the way till you end up in SPIRS. So that SAM.gov contact, that's the person that really needs to be entering your score in SPIRS. Otherwise, you get through all kinds of complexities and crap. So that said, again, the MEP can help you with this. There's a bunch of places you can go to try and get help with this, SBA, SBDC. But that's what it is. The score is, they've come up with a scoring process in NIST, and that, 110 controls, 110 points, right? That's simple. Well, of course it's not, right? Because what they did was they said, well, some controls are not the same as other controls. So they have a 1, 3, 5 kind of scoring process, and you actually subtract if you don't have that score met or that control met. So you can get all the way to minus 203, right? And so you go to minus 203 all the way up to positive 110. And I actually testified before Congress that the average scores that I was getting was minus 105. And so you think about minus 105, positive 110, that's only about a third through all the controls, right? So there's a lot of cost that small businesses especially are going to have to incur to get fully compliant to NIST 800-171, and then add 20 more practices to finish CMMC. So there's, it's going to be tough for small businesses to get there.
Well, and so just for clarification here, so CMMC is the first time that they are sending out a third-party assessor.
Right.
So talk about a hot mess here. So everything, all these things, oh, yes, we're doing it. And now someone's going to come out and say, okay, well, you need to show me. This is going to be a disaster. Anyway,
Remember, we all started with flowdowns.
Yeah, right. Oh my goodness. All right. So what are the 31 basic controls?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm seeing show up more and more on those purchase orders from primes requiring that companies have completed these 31 basic controls. So that's why it matters, because again, you're not going to get a purchase order unless you've completed these 31 basic controls. And keep in mind, this is not a DoD requirement. Remember, you can have that POAM, that get well plan. Okay. This is something that at least one prime right now is requiring of their suppliers that they meet these 31 basic controls. But, you know, NIST has 110 controls. Well, 31 of them are basic, and it comes from someplace. It comes from a FIPS 200 standard that was basic safeguarding of defense systems. And I forgot the exact phrase terminology that they use for that FIPS standard, but that's actually where this comes from. And then the rest of the controls, and if my math is right, I guess that's what, 79. Yeah, I don't have a calculator in front of me to do
That's okay. We'll go with that.
phone or whatever. Anyway, those are derived controls. And all that means, you know, to make it like Barney style here, that just means they're harder to do. Okay. In the 79 are things like having to have an incident response plan, continuous monitoring, SIEMs for managing all the logs that come in and what you do with the logs. So those are just harder things. And so they're done, you know, they're derived.
Okay. All right. So what do you do if a prime says you can't get a PO until you attest that FAR 52-204-21 is complete?
Well, first of all, just don't sign the piece of paper and send it back. Okay. That's the first thing, because honestly, the DOJ just came out saying that they are going to go after false claims acts for things like this, where you're actually saying you've completed it on a DOD order and you haven't. Okay. So in the past, they just haven't had the staff or ability to go after all these things, but because of the issues we're having right now, just in general with, you know, intellectual property from the government being stolen and all these attacks, they're going after this now. So that's the first thing. Don't just sign it. Second is there are 15 controls that make up FAR 52. Okay. So go out, do a search on the internet, find the actual FAR 52 and read it. There's 15 of the items there. They're not that difficult to complete. And if, again, you're a small company and you don't have the staff to do it, this one's probably something that you can sit down with your MSP, your managed service provider that does your IT, and you can go through these and you can get them completed.
Okay. That sounds like something that's, you know, you can kind of get done, you know, but I agree. Don't just sign it and send it back. That's not good, especially now that they're actually going to, they haven't been paying attention to this, but now that they're actually gearing up with staff to check on all this stuff.
Yep.
Okay. Prime is asking you if you provide COTS. What is that?
First of all, it's like happy days if you're a COTS provider, because you know, a lot of the cyber things don't flow down to you if you're making COTS items. So commercially available off the shelf. So really, these are things that, like, if you're selling Pepsi to a base, Pepsi is COTS. Okay. It's commercially available too. Means you sold it out in a store first, and now the government wants to buy it too. That's the easiest definition I can say of COTS. If the government gives you requirements and you have to then make a special bottle that will fit in a Joint Strike Fighter, now it's not COTS anymore. Okay, now it falls into a different category. So hopefully that's the best way I can explain COTS.
Yeah, and my basic understanding of it was basically if let's just say you sell iPads, all right, and anybody can go to a store and buy an iPad, so there's no secrets there, right? So that's generally just, there's no secrets, but if you're changing the shape of the bottle, that's a good point. All right. Yeah. So anything else you want to add to this exciting topic before we wrap it up?
No, hopefully I've made this flow down and other items something at least halfway interesting. It's, as a small business, it really is important, because again, the primes are starting to ratchet up, their requirements. And if you're going to be selling to the DoD, then this stuff really is important to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for sure, especially because the assessors are coming.
They are.
Okay. Well, Scott, thank you very, very much for your time and all of your great information. Really appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. And we hope to see you on the next episode of 123 CMMC. So take care. Bye-bye. This episode is brought to you by A3, a CMMC cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification, otherwise known as an OSC, to build CMMC packages and share with a marketplace of consultant RPOs and assessor C3PAOs.